On the 7th of November 1867, a fifth child was born to two teachers in Warsaw. Her name was Maria Salomea Skłodowska. Warsaw was not the capital of a country. It was the capital of Congress Poland, a province of the Russian Empire. Both sides of her family had lost their property and their money through involvement in Polish uprisings against Russian rule. The most recent had failed 2 years before she was born. That inheritance of confiscated fortunes shaped everything about her childhood. Her father, Władysław, taught mathematics and physics and directed 2 Warsaw secondary schools for boys. When the Russian authorities removed laboratory instruction from Polish schools, he brought the equipment home and taught his own children to use it. He was eventually fired by his Russian supervisors for pro-Polish sentiments and pushed into lower-paid posts. The family lost money on a bad investment. They began taking in boys as lodgers to make the rent. Her mother, Bronislawa, had run a respected Warsaw boarding school for girls and resigned after Maria was born. She died of tuberculosis in May 1878 when Maria was 10. Less than 3 years before that, Maria's eldest sister Zofia had died of typhus caught from one of the lodgers. Her father was an atheist and her mother a devout Catholic. After the 2 deaths, Maria gave up Catholicism and became agnostic. She was a formidable student. She graduated from her girls' secondary school on the 12th of June, 1883 with a gold medal. Then she collapsed, possibly from depression, and spent a year in the countryside with her father's relatives. And then she hit the wall that defined her early life. She could not enroll in a regular institution of higher education because she was a woman. So she and her sister Bronislawa joined the Flying University, a clandestine Polish institution of higher learning that admitted women, moving between private apartments to stay ahead of the authorities. Then the 2 sisters made a pact. Maria would pay for Bronislawa's medical studies in Paris. 2 years later, Bronislawa would do the same for her. Keeping her half of that bargain took 5 years. She worked as a home tutor in Warsaw, then for 2 years as a governess in Suzuki for the Kuraskis, a landed family who were relatives of her father. There she fell in love with their son, Kazimierz Orowski, a future eminent mathematician. His parents refused to let him marry a penniless relative, and he would not oppose them. He became a professor and rector of Krakow University. As an old man, he would sit in front of the statue of Maria Skłodowska that stood before the Radium Institute in Warsaw and look at it. Through all of it, she kept studying, reading, exchanging letters, being tutored. And in 1890, she began her practical scientific training in a chemistry laboratory at the Museum of Industry and Agriculture in Warsaw. The laboratory was run by her cousin, Joseph Boguski, who had been an assistant in St. Petersburg to the Russian chemist Dmitry Mendeleev, the man who built the periodic table. In late 1891, aged 24, she left Poland for France. In Paris, she stayed briefly with her sister and brother-in-law, then rented a garret in the Latin Quarter closer to the university, and enrolled at the University of Paris to study physics, chemistry, and mathematics. She lived on almost nothing. She kept warm through the winters by wearing every piece of clothing she owned. She concentrated so hard on her studies that she sometimes forgot to eat. She studied by day and tutored in the evenings. In 1893, she was awarded a degree in physics and began work in Gabriel Lippmann's industrial laboratory. With the help of a fellowship, she earned a second degree in 1894. Her first commissioned scientific work was an investigation into the magnetic properties of various steels for the Society for the Encouragement of National Industry. She needed a bigger laboratory to do it in. That need is what introduced her to Pierre Curie. A Polish physicist, Józef Wieras Kowalski, heard she was looking for laboratory space and thought Pierre, an instructor at the city's Industrial Physics and Chemistry School, might have some. He did not have a large laboratory. He found her some space anyway. They were drawn together by a shared interest in the natural sciences, and eventually Pierre proposed. She turned him down. She was still planning to go home to Poland. Pierre told her he was prepared to move to Poland with her, even if it meant being reduced to teaching French. In the summer of 1894, she went back to Warsaw, still believing she could work in her chosen field in Poland. Krakow University refused her a place because she was a woman. A letter from Pierre convinced her to return to Paris and pursue a doctorate. At her insistence, Pierre wrote up his own research on magnetism and finally took his own doctorate in March 1895. They married on the 26th of July, 1895, at Sceaux. Neither wanted a religious service. She wore a dark blue outfit instead of a bridal gown, and then wore it for years afterwards as her laboratory clothes. They shared 2 pleasures, long bicycle trips and journeys abroad. In Pierre, she had found a husband, a partner, and a scientific collaborator at the same time. That same year, 1895, Wilhelm Röntgen discovered X-rays, though nobody yet understood how they were produced. The following year, Henri Becquerel found that uranium salts gave off rays resembling X-rays in their penetrating power, and that unlike phosphorescence, the radiation needed no external energy source. It seemed to come out of the uranium itself. Marie Curie decided to make uranium rays the subject of her thesis. Almost nobody thought it was an important problem. Her method was the thing that made the difference. 15 years earlier, Pierre and his brother had developed a version of the electrometer, a sensitive instrument for measuring electric charge. She used it to measure uranium rays. She found that uranium rays made the air around a sample conduct electricity, and she found that the activity of a uranium compound depended only on the quantity of uranium present, nothing else changed it. That is a small sentence with an enormous conclusion inside it. If the activity does not depend on what the uranium is chemically combined with, then the radiation is not coming from any interaction between molecules. It must be coming from the atom itself. At the time, the atom was assumed to be indivisible, the smallest possible piece of matter with no inside. Her hypothesis was an early and important step in demolishing that idea. In 1897, her daughter Irene was born. To support the family, she began teaching at the École Normale Supérieure. The Curies had no dedicated laboratory. Almost all of the work was done in a converted shed next to Pierre's school, a former medical school dissecting room, badly ventilated and not even waterproof. They had no idea that the substances they were handling every day were dangerous. Nobody did. She began systematically testing minerals. 2 uranium ores gave results that did not fit. Pitchblende measured 4 times as active as uranium itself, and chalcolite twice as active. If activity depended only on the quantity of uranium, and her own results said it did, then those 2 minerals had to contain something else. Something present in tiny amounts and far more active than uranium. By 1898, she had discovered that thorium was also radioactive. She was beaten to publication on that one by Gerhard Karl Schmidt. She understood the importance of publishing quickly to establish priority. She was not a member of the Académie des Sciences, so her paper was presented on her behalf on the 12th of April 1898 by her former professor Gabriel Lippmann. Inside that paper is one sentence that nobody else in physics noticed. The activities of pitchblende and chalcolite, she wrote, are so much greater than uranium's that the fact is very remarkable, and leads to the belief that these minerals may contain an element which is much more active than uranium. She later described what she felt as a passionate desire to verify this hypothesis as rapidly as possible. On the 14th of April 1898, the Curies weighed out 100 grams of pitchblende and ground it with a pestle and mortar. They did not yet know that what they were looking for was present in such tiny quantities that they would eventually have to process tons of the ore. By the middle of 1898, Pierre was convinced enough to abandon his own work on crystals, the field he had built his reputation in, and join her. It is worth being precise about whose project this was. The idea was hers. Nobody helped her formulate it. She took it to her husband for his opinion, and she established her ownership of it clearly. She recorded the fact twice in her later biography of Pierre to remove any possible ambiguity. She was already aware that many scientists would find it hard to believe a woman capable of the original work she was doing. In July 1898, the Curies published a joint paper announcing a new element. They named it polonium, after her native country, a country that would remain partitioned between 3 empires for another 20 years. It is the only element named as a protest. On the 26th of December 1898, they announced a second element, radium, from the Latin, for ray. In the course of the same work, they coined a word that did not exist before them, radioactivity. Announcing an element is not the same as proving one. To put the discoveries beyond doubt, they had to isolate both in pure form, and pitchblende is a complicated mineral to pull apart. Polonium was comparatively easy. Chemically, it resembles bismuth, and it was the only bismuth-like substance in the ore. Radium was the problem. Radium is chemically close to barium, and pitchblende contains both. So they separated it by differential crystallization, dissolving, crystallizing, discarding, and repeating thousands of times because the radium concentrates very slightly in each round. It is not a clever trick. It is brute repetition. From 1 ton of pitchblende, in 1902, they separated 1/10 of a single gram of radium chloride. Between 1898 and 1902, the Curies published 32 scientific papers, jointly or separately. One of them reported something that would matter enormously. When exposed to radium, diseased tumor-forming cells were destroyed faster than healthy cells. In 1900, she became the first woman on the faculty of the École Normale Supérieure de Gentilly, and Pierre joined the faculty of the University of Paris. In 1902, she went back to Poland for her father's death. In June 1903, supervised by Lippmann, she was awarded her doctorate from the University of Paris. Earlier that month, the couple had been invited to the Royal Institution in London to give a Friday evening discourse on radium. She was 4 months pregnant and suffering from extreme fatigue. Discourses were given by one person, and although no rule barred women from speaking, convention meant Pierre gave the address. His lecture, entirely in French, made her contribution unmistakable. And the royal institution broke with its own tradition. Lady Duas presented her with a bouquet of La France roses, and she carried them into the theater and sat in the front row among the most eminent members of the institution. Meanwhile, an industry was being built on radium. The Curies did not patent the isolation process and benefited almost nothing from a business that became very profitable. In December 1903, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for the radiation phenomenon discovered by Professor Becquerel. The committee had originally intended to honor only Pierre Curie and Henri Becquerel. A committee member and advocate for women in science, the Swedish mathematician Magnus Gustav Mittag-Leffler, warned Pierre what was about to happen. Pierre complained her name was added to the nomination. She became the first woman awarded a Nobel Prize because a colleague warned her husband what the committee intended, and her husband complained about it. They did not go to Stockholm to collect it. They were too busy, and Pierre, who disliked public ceremonies, was feeling increasingly ill. Laureates were required to deliver a lecture, so they finally made the journey in 1905. The prize money let them hire their first laboratory assistant. After 7 years of work, they could finally afford one pair of extra hands. The University of Geneva offered Pierre a position. Only then did the University of Paris give him a professorship and the chair of physics, and still without a proper laboratory. He complained. The university agreed to build one. It would not be ready until 1906. In December 1904, their second daughter, Eve, was born. Marie hired Polish governesses to teach both girls her own language and took them to Poland. On the 19th of April, 1906, Pierre Curie was walking across the Rue Dauphine in heavy rain. He was struck by a horse-drawn vehicle and fell under its wheels. They fractured his skull and killed him instantly. She was devastated. On the 13th of May, less than a month later, the physics department of the University of Paris decided to keep the chair created for her husband and to offer it to her. She accepted it, hoping to build a world-class laboratory as a tribute to him. She became the first woman to be a professor at the University of Paris. The laboratory took longer. In 1909, Pierre-Paul-Émile Roux, the director of the Pasteur Institute, was so unimpressed by what the University of Paris was giving her that he suggested she move to the Pasteur Institute instead. Only with the threat of losing her did the university relent. The Radium Institute became a joint venture between the two of them. In 1910, 12 years after announcing it, she finally isolated radium as a pure metal. She also defined an international standard for radioactive emissions. It was named after her and Pierre. The Curie. In 1911, the French Academy of Sciences voted on whether to admit her as a member. She lost by 1 or 2 votes. They elected Edouard Branly, an inventor who had helped Marconi develop wireless telegraphy. It would take another half-century before a woman was elected to that academy. When it happened, in 1962, it was Marguerite Perret, one of Curie's own doctoral students. The campaign against her was not only about science. French public feeling at the time ran to xenophobia, the same current that had driven the Dreyfus affair, and it fueled false speculation that she was Jewish. The right-wing press attacked her as a foreigner and an atheist. Her daughter noted the hypocrisy exactly. The French press portrayed her as an unworthy foreigner when she was nominated for a French honor, and as a French heroine when she received foreign ones. Then, in 1911, it emerged that she had been in a year-long relationship with the physicist Paul Langevin, a former student of Pierre's, a married man, estranged from his wife. She was in her mid-40s and 5 years older than Langevin. The tabloids misrepresented her as a foreign Jewish homewrecker. Her academic opponents used it. When the story broke, she was away at a conference in Belgium. She came home to find an angry mob outside her house and had to take her daughters and seek refuge with her friend Camille Marbeau. In the middle of that, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences overcame opposition prompted by the scandal and awarded her a second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for the discovery of radium and polonium and the isolation of radium. The chair of the Nobel Committee, Svante Arrhenius, tried to stop her attending the ceremony, citing her questionable moral standing. Her reply is worth quoting for its economy. The prize, she said, had been given to her for her discovery of polonium and radium, and there is no relation between her scientific work and the facts of her private life. She went to Stockholm. She was the first person to win or share 2 Nobel Prizes, and she remains the only person to have won them in 2 different sciences. A month after accepting it, she was hospitalized with depression and a kidney ailment. She avoided public life for most of 1912, spent time in England with her friend and fellow physicist Hertha Ayrton, and did not return to her laboratory for about 14 months. The Radium Institute was completed in August 1914. Its development was immediately interrupted because most of its researchers were drafted into the French army. And here the story turns into something other than a laboratory story. Curie worked out that wounded soldiers did far better if they were operated on quickly, and that x-rays at the front could save limbs that would otherwise be amputated. So she taught herself radiology, anatomy, and automotive mechanics. Then she procured X-ray equipment, vehicles, and auxiliary generators, and built mobile radiography units. The soldiers called them petites, Curies, little Curies. She became director of the Red Cross Radiology Service and set up France's first military radiology center, operational by late 1914. In the first year, she directed the installation of 20 mobile radiological vehicles and another 200 radiological units at field hospitals. Her assistant at the start was a military doctor and her own daughter Irene, who was 17. Later, she trained other women as aides. In 1915, she produced hollow needles containing radium emanation, a colorless radioactive gas given off by radium, later identified as radon, to sterilize infected tissue. She supplied the radium from her own 1-gram stock. It is estimated that more than 1 million wounded soldiers were treated using her X-ray units. She did almost no scientific research during the war. In spite of all of it, she never received any formal recognition from the French government for that work. When the war started, she tried to donate her gold Nobel medals to the war effort, and the French National Bank refused to accept them. So she bought war bonds with her Nobel Prize money instead, saying plainly that she had no illusions and the money would probably be lost. In 1920, for the 25th anniversary of the discovery of radium, the French government granted her a stipend. The previous recipient of one had been Louis Pasteur in 1874. In 1921, she toured the United States to raise money for radium research. The journalist Marie Mattingly Maloney interviewed her, created a Marie Curie Radium Fund, and publicized the trip. President Warren Harding received her at the White House and presented her with 1 gram of radium, collected by subscription across the United States. Before the meeting, the French government, embarrassed that she had no French decoration to wear in public, offered her the Legion of Honor. She refused it. Under her direction, the Radium Institute produced 4 more Nobel Prize winners, including her daughter, Irene Joliot-Curie, and her son-in-law, Frédéric Joliot-Curie. It became one of the 4 great radioactivity laboratories in the world. In 1922, she joined the League of Nations International Committee on Intellectual Cooperation and sat on it until her death, alongside Albert Einstein, Hendrik Lorentz, and Henry Bergson. In 1925, she went to Poland to lay the foundations of Warsaw's Radium Institute. A second American tour in 1929 paid to equip it. It opened in 1932 with her sister Bronislawa as its director. She visited Poland for the last time in early 1934. On the 4th of July 1934, Marie Curie died at the Saint-Salmas Sanatorium in Passy, in Haute-Savoie. She was 66. The cause was aplastic anemia. Her bone marrow had stopped producing blood cells. The damaging effects of ionizing radiation were not known when she did the work, and was carried out without any of the safety measures developed later. She had carried test tubes of radioactive isotopes in her pocket. She kept them in her desk drawer and remarked on the faint light they gave off in the dark. That image, the glowing tubes in the drawer, is how the story is usually told, and it deserves a correction. When her body was exhumed in 1995, the French Office for Protection Against Ionizing Radiation concluded that she could not have been exposed to lethal levels of radium while she was alive. Radium is dangerous, chiefly if it is ingested. Their conclusion was that her illness was more likely caused by the X-ray work she did in the field hospitals of the First World War, years of exposure to unshielded equipment, in tents at the front. On that reading, the thing that killed Marie Curie was not the radium in her desk drawer. It was the X-ray work at the front. She was buried at the cemetery in Sceaux, beside Pierre. 60 years later, in 1995, both were moved to the Panthéon in Paris. Their remains were sealed in a lead lining because of the radioactivity. She became the first woman to be interred in the Pantheon on her own merits. Her papers from the 1890s are still too radioactive to handle safely. They are kept in lead-lined boxes, and anyone who wants to read them must wear protective clothing. So are her cookbooks. In her last year, she was working on a book called Radioactivity. It was published in 1935, the year after she died. What the work actually did is easy to lose behind the biography. Radium's radioactivity was so intense that it could not be ignored. It appeared to contradict the conservation of energy and forced a reconsideration of the foundations of physics. It handed Ernest Rutherford a source of radiation powerful enough to probe the structure of the atom. His experiments with alpha radiation produced the nuclear atom, and in medicine, radium offered the first real means of attacking cancer. She never patented the radium isolation process so that other scientists could work with it unhindered. She returned to scholarship in 1897 as soon as she was earning enough to live on so that it could go to someone else. She gave much of her first Nobel Prize money to friends, family, students, and colleagues. She insisted that gifts and awards be made to the institution she worked for rather than to her. She and Pierre often refused medals altogether. Albert Einstein reportedly remarked that she was probably the only person who could not be corrupted by fame. She was born in a country that did not exist, in a family that had lost everything for trying to make it exist again. She was refused a university place for being a woman and studied in secret in borrowed rooms. She was refused an academy seat and hounded by newspapers. And she named her first element after the country that was not on the map. 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences. The first woman to hold a professorship at the University of Paris, a word she invented that we still use. A unit of measurement that carries her name. An institute that produced 4 more laureates, 2 of them her own family. And a set of notebooks in a lead-lined box in Paris that will still be dangerous to touch in 1500 years.